Welcome to the shadow frequency, where the veil between this world and the next grows thin, and the things that whisper in the dark are given voice. From the cryptic candlelit studios, deep in the Indiana forests, your host, Matt Wilson, and his spectral producer, Juniper Ravenwood, unearth the forbidden, the forgotten, and the fearsome. So, still your heart, dim the light, and listen closely. For once you tune into the shadow frequency, you may never tune out.
Welcome back to the Shadow Frequency. I am Juniper, and tonight the air around the studio feels just a little thinner, like we're broadcasting from the edge of a canyon and something below us is listening. You ever notice how some places don't just feel remote, they feel aware? Like the trees have been watching cars go by for decades, keeping track of who stopped, who didn't, and who should have kept driving. Let me see what the old file cabinet has for us tonight. I'm opening the bottom drawer here, moving aside a cracked compass. Here's a ranger's hat with no name inside, a pine cone that's somehow cold to the touch, and a road map keeps folding itself back to the same stretch of forest. Well, here we go. Tonight's episode is episode 345. The Mogollon Rim Hitchhiker, the stranger you can't refuse. The Mogollon Rim stretches across north-central Arizona like a massive stone threshold between worlds. Pine forests above, desert country below, cliffs, canyons, lonely roads, and a long reputation for strange lights, strange creatures, and stranger stories. At the center of tonight's case is a man named Jay, reportedly a wildlife biologist working black bear country for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. He was not hunting monsters, he was not chasing UFOs. He was doing field work. And then, in a place where no one should have been standing, he encountered a stranger who wanted a ride. Not just a lost hitchhiker, not just a shadow in the trees, something that stepped into the road, into the rules of human decency, and made the question very simple. Do you stop, or do you keep driving? Chris, I'll start with you. What do you think when you hear impossible hitchhiker on the Mogollon Rim?
That is the kind of story that gets under my skin, because it starts so ordinary. A person on a road asking for help that should be simple. But when the setting is that remote, and the person should not be there, suddenly the most normal thing in the world becomes terrifying.
Exactly. It's not the monster bursting from the trees, it's the stranger using the oldest trick in the book, asking politely. Matt, what about you? Wilderness case, trained observer, strange figure on a lonely road, where does that put you?
That puts me right in the uncomfortable middle. If this guy was a wildlife biologist, he understood terrain, animals, and isolation. So if something felt wrong to him, I want to know why. Because out there, your instincts are part of your survival gear.
And tonight, those instincts may have been the only thing standing between Jay and whatever wanted into that vehicle. Matt, bring us on in.
You are tuned to the shadow frequency, where every whisper tells a story from beyond the veil. Hosted by Matt Wilson, produced by Juniper Ravenwood, with Chris Beach. The darkness continues.
Thanks, Juniper. And yeah, tonight's case is one of those that starts out feeling almost normal. A man doing a job in the backcountry, and then the road bends just a little too far away from the normal. So let's open the file up and set our boots down on the Mogollon Rim. We're in north-central Arizona, along that enormous escarpment, where the Colorado Plateau seems to drop away from itself, where pine country gives way to canyon country, where one side of the world can feel cold and forested and the other side starts sliding toward desert heat. The rim runs for roughly 200 miles, and in places the land falls away by thousands of feet. That means long views, sudden weather, lonely forest roads, and stretches where you can drive with your window down and still feel like the trees are listening. And that matters because tonight's story is not just about a person on a road. It is about a boundary line, a place where the map says you are in Arizona, but something older may be standing just beyond the shoulder, waiting for you to slow down. The man at the center of this account is known as Jay, and that detail matters too because Jay was not out there chasing legends. He was not camping with friends and daring something to appear. He was reportedly working as a wildlife biologist for the Arizona Game and Fish Department, studying black bears in the rugged canyons and terrain of the rim. That puts him in a different category from the average witness. A biologist working bear country knows what animals sound like when they move through brush. He knows what distance does to voices, what shadows do at dusk, what isolation does to judgment. He knows the difference between a hiker who is lost and an animal that is circling, between a normal backcountry problem and something that makes the inside of your chest go cold. So picture him out there, field work done or nearly done, vehicle dusty, light changing, the kind of road where every bend looks like it could lead back to civilization or deeper into nowhere. And then, in a place where no one should reasonably be standing, there is a stranger. Now let me pull something out from the file here. This is a printed Arizona Game and Fish black bear distribution sheet. And the reason I like having it on the table here is because it reminds us Jay had a completely reasonable reason to be there. Arizona's black bears are tied to woodland and forest habitat. And the Mogollon Rim is one of the places where their relative density is highest. So this was real field country, bear country, not a paved little pull-off with a soda machine and a campground host nearby. Jay's work would have taken him into the kind of drainages and rough forest edges where tracks disappear in pine needles, and ravens seem to know more than they should. And that is where the account turns. The figure is not described as some glowing phantom at first. That would almost be easier. Instead, it has the shape of a person. And that is the trap in the story. A human shape activates the human part of us. Someone out here might need help. Someone out here might be hurt. Someone out here might die if you just keep driving. But what happens when the shape of a person is being used like bait? As the story is told, this stranger wanted a ride, not in the casual roadside way, not with the harmless awkwardness of someone who misjudged a hike and needs a lift back to a trailhead. The request had pressure in it. There was insistence, the kind of insistence that makes refusal feel strangely difficult, even when every practical part of your mind is screaming that the situation is wrong. And that's where I think this case gets under the skin, because the terror is not claws in the dark or lights in the sky. It is social terror. It is the fear of being manipulated by something that knows the rules of human kindness and is leaning on them. Out in that wilderness, the stranger did not have to chase him. It only had to ask. It only had to make the question feel unavoidable. And when someone appears from nowhere in terrain like that, asking for entry into your vehicle, your private little bubble of safety, the road suddenly becomes a negotiation with something you never agreed to meet. The Mogollon Rim already has a reputation that makes this encounter feel like it belongs there. Stories of strange lights and UFO activity drift through the area. There are old campfire accounts of eerie sounds, figures in the trees, and of course, the Mogollon Monster, Arizona's own Bigfoot-like presence said to haunt the pine-covered hills and rough country along the rim. Those stories usually give us a towering shape at the edge of camp, a foul smell, heavy footfalls, something big enough to make even experienced outdoorsmen go quiet. But Jay's Hitchhiker is different. If the Mogollon Monster is the fear of something animal and ancient moving beyond the lantern light, the Hitchhiker is the fear of something intelligent enough to use a smaller shape. Something that does not have to roar, something that knows a road is more powerful than a trail, and a request is more powerful than a threat. It steps into a human scenario and makes the witness decide whether compassion is still safe. And that is the hook of the first half tonight. Jay is alone, trained, familiar with the land, and still confronted with an impossible stranger in a place where the ordinary explanations start to feel too thin. Maybe the figure was a spirit tied to the rim. Maybe it was a trickster presence wearing the most useful mask. Maybe it was something from the deeper folklore of haunted roads. Not quite a ghost, not quite a monster, but a traveler that appears where the world gets lonely and asks to be taken somewhere it cannot reach on its own. The question hanging over this file is not simply did Jay see something strange? The question is whether the Rim presented him with a test. Because out there, under the pines, with the cliffs dropping away and the road stretching forward, a stranger asks for a ride, and some requests sound less like questions than commands. And that's where we leave Jay for the moment, alone on the Rim, facing something that looked human enough to ask for help, but wrong enough to make the whole forest feel like it was holding its breath.
That is exactly the kind of situation where every polite instinct becomes dangerous.
And even if you want to tell yourself it was just a person, the setting makes that hard. Because why there? Why then? And why did it feel like refusing wasn't simple?
Coming up in the second half, we'll look deeper at the folklore around the Rim, the old monster stories, the vanishing hitchhiker pattern, and one grounded possibility that still doesn't make the encounter any less disturbing. Juniper and Chris take us to the break.
Some roads do not just take you across the landscape. They take you close enough to the edge of something older that it starts looking back.
So far, this one has that slow, crawling kind of fear, not something chasing you through the woods, but something stepping close enough to speak. And I keep wondering what our listeners would do. Would you stop? Would you lock the doors? Would you convince yourself it was just a person who needed help? Or would you feel what Jay reportedly felt? That the road had changed and the person standing there was not really asking. Chris, take us through the break before we head deeper into the Rim.
Thanks, June. And I'll tell you, this is one of those cases where the setting does half the haunting for you. A lonely road, bare country, pine forest, cliffs nearby, and then someone appears where they absolutely should not be. That's proper nightmare fuel. While we're paused here, take a second to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're using. It really does help the algorithms know there are people out there listening in the dark with us. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Rumble, and all the major podcast directories. And don't forget shadowfrequencypodcast.com. That's where you'll find all the episodes, the companion blog, merch, show notes, and links to every platform. You can also support the show by buying us a coffee on the website, and you can reach out by email or voice message. Who knows, your message may end up on a future episode. June, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Chris. All right, it's time to wake up the spectrocosmic message materializer. Let's flip the switches, letting the tubes warm, watching the little green eye open in the center of the panel. Something's riding all around in here tonight. A little envelope just slid through the static slot, and it smells faintly of solder, dust, and a room where too many old radios are still plugged in. Let's open this one carefully. This one comes from Greg in Illinois, who listens on Pandora. He says, I usually listen to the shadow frequency late at night out in my electronic workroom. I've got old circuit boards, test meters, radio parts, and little lights blinking all over the place, so your show fits the mood pretty well. I listen on Pandora while I'm working on repairs or sorting through parts bins, and I'll admit some of the UFO episodes have made me look twice at the old shortwave receiver in the corner. I also really enjoy the cryptid stories, especially when they're tied to lonely places in the woods. Keep the signal grounded and the shadows wired. Greg from Illinois. Oh, Greg, I love that. An electronic workroom might be one of the most shadow frequency places imaginable. Little blinking lights, old components, a radio in the corner, and cryptids crawling through the conversation. That's practically a studio edX. And if you'd like to reach out like Greg did, send us an email anytime at shadowpodcast@protonmail.com. Now, Chris, I'm going to turn it back over to you for a little shadow news.
Thanks, June. And Greg, I absolutely love the idea of this show playing in an electronic workroom. That feels like exactly the kind of place where one device on the shelf suddenly powers itself on at 2:13 in the morning and nobody wants to explain why. A new and highly speculative paper is stirring debate over the Great Pyramid, arguing it may have been more than a royal tomb and could have functioned as a kind of cosmic-scale gravitational transmitter. The theory comes from Jalal Jafari of Shahid Beheshti University in Iran, and appears in a 2025 preprint, not a peer-reviewed study. Jafari points to the pyramid's location, proportions and alignment as possible clues, but mainstream archaeologists and physicists have offered no evidence that the structure was built for anything like interstellar communication. June, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Chris, and that is the kind of story that sits perfectly on the shadow frequency shelf. Strange, speculative, probably impossible, and still just odd enough to make you look at an ancient structure and wonder what else we may have misunderstood. And that ties nicely back in tonight's case, because whether we're talking about pyramids, cliffs, old roads, or lonely forests, people have always sensed that some places carry more than scenery. Some places feel like they are built to receive something. So let's head back to the Mogollon Rim, where the road is still waiting, the trees are still watching, and Matt has a few more things in tonight's file. All right, Matt, take us into the second half.
The Mogollon Rim is already a borderland of cliffs, pine, desert, and shadow. But Jay's encounter suggests there may be another boundary there too, one between the human world and whatever waits just outside the headlights.
Thanks, Juniper, and Greg's email has that perfect setting for this episode. Lights low in an electronic workroom, little green indicators glowing, and suddenly we're talking about a stranger on a wilderness road who may or may not belong to the same world as the rest of us. And my dad, while I was growing up, had an electronic shop in the house in one room, and I used to go in there and rate it for bits and bobs to make. I had the house bugged once, to my mother's chagrin. And Chris, that pyramid story is one of those perfect shadow frequency side doors. Maybe it is only a speculative idea, but it reminds us how often humans look at old stone, old landscapes, old alignments, and wonder if something bigger was being built into the world before we arrived with our modern explanations. The Mogollon Rim, it has that same feeling. Not a monument in the usual sense, but a natural wall with roads along the top, canyons below, old trails, forest cabins, lakes, storms, and the sense that certain places are not just scenery. They are thresholds, and thresholds have always attracted stories that behave like warnings. Let me pull another item out of the file now. This is a photocopy of an old wild man style account tied to the early 20th century folklore around Arizona's high country. The kind of newspaper story that later gets folded into the larger Mogollon monster tradition. These reports described hairy human-like figures, strange screams, and beings that seem to stand somewhere between animal and person. Now, Jay's Hitchhiker does not really match that creature. That is what makes it interesting. It is not 7 feet tall in the way the monster is often described. It is not simply crashing through brush or raiding a camp. But folklore does not always keep one clean costume. Sometimes a place develops a pattern instead, a figure at the edge of human understanding. A presence that watches, approaches, and then forces a decision. Along the rim, the old monster stories tell us the forest may contain intelligence. The Hitchhiker story asks whether that intelligence can step onto the road and speak, calmly enough that you answer before you understand the question. Here is the one rational angle we ought to give this file because it actually makes the story stronger, not weaker. The rim is rough country. Roads can be remote. Weather can turn fast. Storms and lightning are part of the summer pattern. And a person can become exhausted, disoriented, overheated, cold, frightened, or desperate. A lost hiker, a stranded camper, someone in mental distress, or even a person deliberately trying to scare or manipulate a driver would be enough to create a deeply unsettling encounter. And yes, when you are alone in backcountry terrain, your brain is doing survival math at high speed. Shadows stretch, distance lies, voices carry strangely through canyons. A normal human being in the wrong place at the wrong time can feel impossible. But that explanation has a problem in this case. The account does not linger because Jay saw a person. It lingers because of the pressure around the encounter, the sense that the stranger was not merely asking but exerting some kind of force over the situation. That is the part people remember, not the siding, but the feeling of being pulled toward an answer. And that is where the vanishing hitchhiker tradition creeps in from the edges. All over the world, roads collect stories of riders who appear, request passage, and then become something else, gone from the back seat, connected to a death, tied to a cemetery, or revealed as a warning wearing human form. But the Mogollon Rim version has a wilderness twist. This is not a lonely city road after a dance. This is not a woman in white under streetlights. This is a figure in backcountry Arizona, where the road itself feels like a thin agreement between civilization and the wild. In older folklore, trickster beings and land spirits often test people through ordinary social obligations: hospitality, generosity, respect, caution. They do not announce themselves with a title. They arrive as a stranger. They ask for something simple, and then the human being has to decide whether the rules of politeness still apply when every instinct says the situation has slipped sideways. That is why this story feels bigger than the one roadside encounter. It feels like an old test wearing a modern road. So what was Jay dealing with? A desperate human being in impossible terrain is possible. A misread moment made monstrous by isolation is possible. But so is the darker folkloric reading that the rim has a way of producing encounters that imitate the shape of whatever will get closest to you. If you fear animals, you hear something heavy in the brush. If you fear the sky, you see lights over the tree line. If you trust people, maybe a person appears. And maybe that is why the hitchhiker is such a brilliant, terrible form for the unknown to take, because it does not need to break into your vehicle. It makes you open the door. It does not need to hunt you through the forest. It makes you pull over. It turns kindness into a latch. It turns hesitation into an invitation. And when the episode ends, we are left with the same question Jay may have carried out of those canyons. When a stranger appears where no stranger should be, and the land around you feels like it is holding its breath, are you refusing a person or disobeying something older than the road? That's the part I keep coming back to. The rim did not have to show Jay a monster. It may have shown him something worse, a reason to unlock the door.
And that makes it worse than a normal creature story in some ways. Because a monster in the trees is one thing. A stranger who knows how to make you feel guilty for not stopping, that's much harder to shake.
I don't like that at all. There's something deeply unfair about the paranormal using manners against us.
That may be the final lesson of this one out there on the Mogollon Rim. The wild may not always come with teeth and claws. Sometimes it comes with a human face, a simple request, and a silence behind it that tells you the wrong answer may follow you home. Juniper, I'll turn it back to you.
A hitchhiker in the wilderness is unsettling enough. But a stranger who appears where no stranger should be may not be asking for a ride at all. They may be testing whether you still believe you have a choice.
Tonight, we followed the road along the Mogollon Rim, through the pine forest, canyon air, bear country, monster lore, and the unsettling story of Jay, a wildlife biologist who reportedly met a stranger where no stranger should have been. And maybe that's why this case lingers. It takes one of the oldest human questions, should I help this person? And places it in a landscape where the answer may not belong entirely to us. Thank you for joining us on The Shadow Frequency. We'll be back next time with another strange case from the edge of the signal. You guys want to say goodnight?
Good night. Be kind out there, but maybe keep the doors locked until you know exactly what you're dealing with.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for spending part of your night with us. And if you find yourself driving a lonely road through the woods, trust that little voice in the back of your mind.
Good night from all of us at The Shadow Frequency. Keep your headlights steady, keep your hand near the lock, and if someone steps out of the trees asking for a ride, remember that not every passenger is trying to get home.
This episode was conjured with a solemn vow to explore the unexplained while remaining bound to the truths that have been unearthed. All interpretations are speculative and offered only for your enlightenment and your entertainment.